Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a place where winter isn't just cold, it's culinary punishment. Picture this. You're a peasant farmer in a village no one can pronounce, surrounded by nothing but frozen earth and grey skies. Your breath fogs in the air, your fingers are numb, and the only thing waiting for you at the hearth is a block of bread so hard it could double as a weapon. Yes, welcome to the winter bread brick. You probably won't survive this dinner without chipping a tooth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pick up the knife, or try to. The crust on this bread is somewhere between medieval construction material and natural armor plating. You're not slicing it, you're negotiating with it. Eventually, after some vigorous sawing, you pry loose a wedge of what was once rye or barley, or possibly some chaotic mix of both. The interior is dense, damp, slightly gray, not moldy yet, but it's been on the edge for at least a week. This isn't the soft, aromatic loaf from a modern bakery. It's winter, and you're eating the last of the harvest's bread likely baked weeks ago, hardened on the shelf, and now softened slightly only by sitting next to the stew pot's steam. If you're lucky, the bread contains no extra guests. If you're not well, you might get a little bonus protein in the form of weevils. Yes, those. The funny thing is, bread was still considered a luxury in some cases. While nobles dined on fine white loaves made with sifted flour, your bread is darker than your thoughts after the third hour in the snow. It's coarse, full of bran bits of husk, and sometimes tiny pebbles if the millstone was overdue for maintenance. Many medieval dentists, or rather blacksmiths who moonlighted as such, owed their clientele to bread like this. And heaven help you if you're in Northern Europe during the early 1300s. That's when the Great Famine hit and people were literally grinding bark into their dough to stretch the flour supply. Bark in bread. Crunchy? Yes. Nutritious? Not really. Historians still argue whether the texture was simply unpleasant or genuinely damaging to digestion. Some records describe peasants developing stomach ailments. Others note tooth loss in adults far too young for dentures. But let's not dwell too hard on that as you take another fictional bite. You chew slowly. It's not like you're in a hurry, nothing else is coming. The stew pot might have been empty for days. This crusty wedge is dinner. Again, maybe you dip it in hot water, or if you're blessed, a ladle of broth, more bones than meat. The warmth helps a little. It doesn't make the bread good, but it makes it go down. There's something grimly romantic about this moment. The fire crackles. The wind howls outside. Your boots are drying by the hearth, steaming slightly. You tear off another piece and stare into the embers, pretending it tastes like honey and saffron. You wish. Instead, you taste dust and the tang of bitter rye and something else, a hint of damp. Maybe this loaf sat too close to the window, or maybe it was baked by your cousin who isn't exactly known for his hygiene. Either way, you eat it, because it's food. And because there's no choice. People today romanticize the simple medieval life, but they rarely factor in the teeth-breaking winter bread. The kind you had to soak, chew, gnaw, and sometimes fight just to make it edible. And even worse, you had to ration it. This one loaf, it's supposed to last you 3 days. 4 if the weather stays bad. So you take another bite. and tell yourself it's filling, which is technically true. It's filling up your stomach, but also your soul with sorrow. Maybe if you sleep early, you won't feel the hunger quite so much. Maybe the cold will dull it. Maybe tomorrow someone will bring turnips. But we'll get to those soon. The sun rises well, sort of. It's more of a gray suggestion than an actual sunrise. You peel back the wool blanket that's barely more effective than wearing 2 potato sacks sewn together, and your stomach growls immediately. You shuffle toward the hearth, praying that someone made gruel. Spoiler alert, they did. Again, you ladle out a serving of what may be the most uninspiring dish known to humankind. Gruel, watery porridge, the great equalizer of the medieval peasantry. No matter your region, no matter your harvest, somehow you always end up eating a bowl of this sad, drippy warmth. Today it's oats, or maybe barley. The consistency is what really matters, just thick enough to hold a wooden spoon upright for a few seconds before it flops over in protest. It's like a bowl of cereal where someone forgot the cereal and used bath water instead of milk. Historians still argue whether medieval gruel was nutritionally sufficient. Some say it was essential, providing enough calories and fiber to get through a hard day's labor. Others suggest it was more of a placeholder for actual food, a warm distraction from the fact that the pantry was mostly empty and the chickens had stopped laying. And the worst part? It's not even bad. It's just relentlessly dull. Like the 7th time someone tells you the same story and you're too polite to say anything. Gruel doesn't offend your taste buds. It simply lets them down softly and repeatedly. You stir slowly, watching steam rise in lazy tendrils. No sugar, no cream. Maybe a pinch of salt if someone remembered. And definitely no fruit that's reserved for feast days and delusions. You're lucky if this batch was made from stone-ground grain and not sweepings from the mill floor. If it's summer, the gruel might be slightly sour thanks to fermentation. If it's winter, it's bland and lukewarm because fuel is scarce, and you're not about to waste firewood boiling something no one wants to eat hot anyway. You lift the spoon and take a bite. It slides across your tongue like sad oatmeal on vacation. Warm, wet, vaguely starchy. You chew out of habit, not necessity. There's nothing to chew, but doing it makes it feel like food. As you eat, your mind drifts to the one time someone added leeks to the pot. That was a banner day. You still dream about that gruel. It had flavor. It had color. You remember it the way modern people remember weddings or first kisses. You glance around the room. Everyone else is silently eating too. No one complains. There's no point. This is breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner. If there's enough to go around, you might get a second helping later. If not, well, tough gruel. You'd think something this repetitive would make you creative. And sometimes it does. Peasants occasionally mixed in bits of bread herbs or even old beer to liven things up. But mostly they just endured. Because there's no recipe for excitement when your pantry contains 3 ingredients and a prayer. Some nobles wrote about gruel as food for the poor. That's true, but it also became food for the sick, the elderly, the prisoners, and basically anyone society decided shouldn't enjoy lunch too much. Monasteries served it with humility. Villages served it with sighs. And through all this, gruel endured. Not because it was delicious, but because it was dependable. You could make it with nearly anything. And you could stretch it watered down, boiled up, endlessly reheated. It might not satisfy, but it filled a bowl, and sometimes that was enough. So you take another bite, And as it slips past your tongue and settles into your gut like a soft murmur, you try not to resent it. Gruel didn't do this to you. Gruel is just the messenger. Outside birds chirp faintly. Somewhere a cow moos in the distance. You stare into your bowl already thinking about tomorrow's gruel. It will taste the same. It will look the same. But maybe, just maybe, someone will sprinkle in a few wild garlic leaves. You dare to dream. It's summer now, though. Summer is mostly just a warmer shade of struggle. The fields shimmer in the heat, your back aches from harvesting barley, and your shirt sticks unpleasantly to your skin. You trudge back toward the cottage, sweat-streaked and sunburnt, and the smell hits you before you even open the door. Saltfish. Again. A slab of something vaguely fish-shaped sits on the table, like it washed up there on purpose. It's stiff leathery and smells like the sea had a fever dream. You pause. Consider chewing your boot instead, and then sit down with the kind of sigh that only the overworked and underfed can perfect. Saltfish was once considered a great solution to food storage. Fish from coastal regions, especially cod, herring, or whiting, could be heavily salted and dried to last through lean months. And when you first hear about this, it sounds clever. It sounds resourceful. But then you eat it. For the 30th time that season, you pick up a knife and start sawing through the grainy exterior. It resists. It always resists, like it's fighting back. This isn't dinner, it's a dare. You have to soak it for hours, sometimes overnight, just to make it less inedible. But that still leaves the overwhelming saltiness. Your first bite is like chewing on the concept of dehydration itself. Historians still argue whether saltfish was genuinely nutritious or merely survivable. Some sources suggest it was vital for vitamin D and protein during cold months. Others claim peasants rarely received enough to make any real difference, and that the salt content alone was enough to ruin your week. And we haven't even mentioned the texture. It's not flaky. It's not moist. It's fibrous and chewy and weirdly tough, like jerky's evil cousin. You chew and chew and chew and eventually swallow because there's no elegant exit strategy once you've committed. The salt clings to everything. Your tongue, your lips, your soul. You drink water, bad idea. Now you just taste warm minerals plus fish. Maybe ale helps if there's any left from last week's brewing. But really, nothing cuts through the salt. Nothing helps. And yet you eat it because you're told it's good for you. Because your uncle traded for it. Because it doesn't rot. Well, not immediately. Sometimes it does grow a fine white fuzz when the humidity gets too high, and then you're playing a fun game called Is This Edible or Experimental? There's no sauce, no lemon, no herbs. You're not in a tavern with a bard playing lute music. You're sitting at a wooden table with uneven legs, scraping your fork along a plate that's older than your grandmother, eating something that tastes like regret. You miss winter bread now. You long for the soft, dull indifference of gruel. At least those foods didn't leave you parched and pickled from the inside out. And yet saltfish remained a staple for centuries. In monasteries, it was the go-to fasting food. For seafarers, it was gold. For peasants like you, it was what you ate because meat was for feast days and fantasy. There's even a legend that some monks in Scandinavia created a stew so salty it was declared a test of holiness. Only the truly righteous could finish it without weeping. Probably not true, but honestly, you'd believe it. You finish the meal slowly licking salt from your fingertips because waste not, want not. Your teeth hurt a little. Your tongue feels like leather. But your stomach is full. And full is rare. You lean back on the bench, eyes half closed, and wonder how many more days of this you can take. The answer is all of them. Because that's what survival means here. You don't get a new menu. You just get creative with your expectations. You wake up before dawn. Again, the rooster hasn't even bothered to crow yet. He's probably still digesting the same stale grains as you. You pull on your tunic, scuff your boots across the floor, and try to convince yourself that today will be different. Maybe someone baked something. Maybe there's a rabbit stew waiting. Nope, it's turnips. Just turnips. A heap of them sits on a table like a joke no one's brave enough to laugh at. They're dirty, lumpy, the color of old fingernails. You sit down and stare at them as if squinting hard enough will turn them into apples or bread or literally anything else. Turnips are the ultimate fallback food, never anyone's first choice, always present when everything else is gone. They're stubborn little things growing even in poor soil, resisting drought, frost, and basic decency. If medieval survival had a mascot, it would be a turnip, bland, unkillable, and quietly disappointing. You pick one up. It still has clumps of earth clinging to it, and the roots dangle like limp mustaches. You slice it in half. The smell is faintly sour with a top note of cold cellar. It's raw. Of course it is. No one lit the fire yet. You bite into it anyway. The taste is confusing, bitter, peppery, watery. Imagine a radish that gave up on having a personality. Your teeth crunch through fibrous flesh that seems to defy digestion. Chewing takes work. Swallowing takes courage. But this is breakfast now. Historians still argue whether turnips were truly hated or simply overexposed. Some say they were a peasant's saving grace during hard times. Others point to medieval jokes that used turnips as punchlines. "He's got the brains of a boiled turnip" wasn't exactly a compliment. And speaking of boiling, that's usually how you prepare these things. Boil them until soft. Mash them maybe. Add herbs if you have any, which you don't. The result? A pale sludge that tastes like warmed over defeat. You remember a time someone roasted one over coals. The outside burned. The inside stayed raw. That's the turnip's greatest trick. It's never quite ready, no matter how long you cook it. You've eaten them boiled, pickled, even fermented. None of those methods helped much. Sometimes you just put a slice in your mouth and wait for your brain to stop noticing. And they're everywhere. Every garden grows them. Every field coughs up a few. They survive winter better than you do. If it's February and you're hungry, odds are good you'll be staring down another pot of turnips. They're also strangely versatile in the worst way. In times of famine, people made turnip bread, which was somehow both dry and wet. Some even brewed weak alcohol from them, which sounds impressive until you realize you're drinking what's essentially moldy vegetable sadness. But there's one tiny surprising fact. In some places, turnips were used as lanterns, hollowed out and carved with faces. A proto-jack-o'-lantern. Kids might have even enjoyed that part before eating the leftover scraps and remembering why no one smiles during supper. You take another bite. You have to. There's work to do. The fields won't hoe themselves, and you can't swing a scythe on an empty stomach. Turnips won't make you happy, but they'll keep you upright. At least until dinner, which is probably more turnips. You sigh, stand up and wipe your hands on your tunic. The turnip pile hasn't gotten any smaller, but neither has your to-do list. You grab a few for lunch. They bounce around in your sack like tiny insults. You'll boil them over a fire if you get lucky. Otherwise, they'll stay raw. And so, with turnips in your pocket and a vague sense of dread in your chest, you step into the daylight and pretend you're full. By the time spring rolls around, you'd think things would get better. The days stretch longer, the birds start singing again, and tiny green shoots push their way through thawed ground. There's a sense of hope in the air, a dangerous thing in a peasant's heart. Because spring doesn't mean fresh food, it means rotting food. You open the storage pit behind your cottage. The smell hits first. It's not awful, just tired. The scent of things that almost made it. You lift the cover and peer inside. Root vegetables, onions, a few jars of pickled cabbage, all of them survivors of a long cold winter. But not without damage. The turnips are soft. Too soft. You pick one up and your thumb sinks in with a wet pop. You drop it fast and pretend it didn't wiggle. The potatoes have started to sprout those pale finger-like growths that look more alive than the plant they came from. And the onions. Well, some of them are now soup, on their own. Historians still argue whether spring rot was the most dangerous food phase for peasants or just the most depressing. Some say spoiled stores led to illness outbreaks. Others believe farmers developed iron guts and stronger immune systems precisely because they ate things modern people wouldn't feed a raccoon. You poke a suspicious-looking carrot. It pokes back, sort of. You debate cutting off the bad bits. The trouble is, the bad bits are now most of the carrot. Still, you do it. Waste not, want not. You peel off the slime with a knife and hold what's left up to the light. It's translucent. You're not sure carrots are supposed to be translucent, but you boil it anyway. Boiling is your magic trick. It hides things. Texture, smell, regret. If you boil something long enough, it becomes part of the soup and stops being a moral dilemma. You toss in a few onions, mushy weeping, but technically still onions, and stir the pot slowly. This is what passes for fresh in early spring. Not because you harvested it, but because it hasn't completely liquefied. Yet, your neighbors are doing the same thing. There's no pride in these meals, no joy, just endurance. And coughing, a lot of coughing. That's probably unrelated, you hope. Some peasants had cellars with better ventilation. Others used smokehouses or straw insulation. But the average set up a pit in the ground and crossed fingers. Mold grew, mice visited, bugs made their homes. And you still had to eat it all. There's a moldy onion hanging from a string above your table. Not for eating, at least not yet. It's meant to keep spirits away. Or maybe rats. No one remembers anymore. You like to think it's working. The stew simmers. You take a cautious taste. It's warm. It's edible. It tastes like surrender. But it will keep you from collapsing in the field. And that's good enough. You mop up the last bit with a crust of winter bread, now harder than medieval math. It's stale, yes, but compared to the fuzzed-out vegetables, it might actually be the safest thing in the bowl. You lean back, exhale through your nose, and tell yourself it could be worse. You could have no stew at all. You could be chewing tree bark like they did during the Great Famine. Or worse, someone might offer you a slice of turnip cake again. Spring isn't renewal for farmers. It's the waiting room between misery and maybe slightly less misery. The hunger doesn't vanish. It just gets moldy around the edges. So you've survived the winter bread, endured the endless gruel. choked down saltfish, cursed the turnip, braved spring rot. You'd think it couldn't get worse. But then comes the wormy bread. Not wormy as in haha little bugs, wormy as in hallucinations, gangrene, and actual madness. The loaf sits on the table deceptively normal looking. Dense, dark peasant-style rye bread, coarse and crumbly like always. But this one has a secret. A surprise. A fungal twist known today as ergot. Ergot is a mold that grows on damp rye and barley, especially during cool, wet seasons. You can't see it. You can't taste it. But once it's baked into your bread and eaten, it goes to work inside your bloodstream, your nervous system, your mind. Historians still argue whether ergotism outbreaks were common or rare, but the records are terrifying. People would feel crawling sensations under their skin, see flashing lights, get seizures. Fingers would blacken and fall off. Entire villages danced in the streets, uncontrollably laughed until they collapsed, or walked straight into rivers thinking they were beds. And all of it from bread. Today we'd call this St. Anthony's fire, a medical condition caused by ergot poisoning. Back then, no one knew what was happening. People blamed demons, or witches, or God being especially moody. But all along it was their daily loaf laced with alkaloids playing tricks on their fragile nervous systems. You look down at your crust. It's fine, right? No green fuzz. No strange smell. Just rye. The same rye you've been eating all month. You break off a piece and chew slowly, trying not to think about whether your fingertips feel tingly, or if that's just your imagination. The problem was that poor farmers didn't get fresh bread every week. You stored grain wherever you could, sacks in a damp cellar, barrels sealed with cloth, even clay pots hidden under floorboards. If moisture got in, and it always did, the fungus could take hold. And since you didn't waste food, you ground it up, baked it, and ate it anyway. Some scholars believe entire witch trials may have been triggered by ergot hallucinations. A woman sees her neighbor floating in a dream. She screams. The priest hears her confession. Suddenly, everyone's possessed. But really, they just shared the same bad loaf. Still, it wasn't always that dramatic. Sometimes you just got stomach cramps, or numb lips, or dreams that felt a little too vivid. And most of the time, no one connected the dots. Why would they? Bread is sacred. Bread is life. Well, not this bread. You bite again. The flavor is earthy, maybe a bit off, but nothing you'd notice after a long day in the fields. Your body is hungry enough to override caution, and if your fingers start twitching later, must be the weather, or the ghosts, or the peasant's answer to everything. It just happens sometimes. Even when things go horribly wrong, no one stops baking. It's too central. Bread is ritual. Bread is what makes you human in a time when livestock often get treated better than laborers. In France, ergot outbreaks were so feared that monasteries offered healing bread as a spiritual cure, essentially just normal non-infected loaves. Imagine that. You walk miles in agony and the miracle cure is a slice of wheat bread made properly. But it works. Because the poison wasn't divine, it was damp storage. You finish your crust and listen to the wind outside. No voices, no hallucinations. Yet, you hope this wasn't one of the fun batches. You'd rather not spend the night conversing with imaginary cows again. The candles flicker gently. The dog snores. Everything feels normal until it doesn't. But that's the gamble of the wormy bread. Tonight's menu features a true delicacy, peasant cheese. The kind that makes you lower your expectations before you even take the first bite. It's sitting there on the wooden plate like it's proud of itself. A squat, crumbly wedge with a yellowish tinge and a crust that may or may not have been scraped off a few times already. It doesn't smell bad exactly. It just smells like something that once was food and then got a little too philosophical about its purpose. You cut a sliver. It flakes under the knife. A little squeak as it comes apart. You pop it in your mouth and immediately regret it. Peasant cheese is not creamy. It is not smooth. It is not aged to perfection. It is sour, grainy, sometimes gritty. Every bite feels like chewing on a mistake. Made from raw milk goat if you're lucky, sheep if you're not, and pressed into little molds using whatever rags and stones were lying around. This was cheese born out of desperation, not decadence. Historians still argue whether peasant cheese was actively nutritious or just the only way to preserve excess milk in summer. Some say it saved lives. Others say it was more like edible chalk with attitude. It certainly wasn't cheddar or brie or anything remotely meltable. Peasant cheese was hard, sometimes dangerously so. If left too long in the cupboard, it could double as a doorstop. And yet it was treasured, because milk spoiled fast and cows didn't always cooperate. So when curds formed, you pressed them, salted them, dried them, and hoped for the best. You remember watching your aunt make a batch once. She stirred the pot with an old wooden spoon, added a few drops of rennet from a calf's stomach, and waited. The curds separated. The smell filled the cottage like sour socks in summer. She poured the whey into a trough for the pigs and patted the lump of curd like it was her firstborn. The result: this very cheese you're now chewing dry, sharp, and ever so slightly suspicious. Sometimes it was flavored with herbs. Sometimes it came with bonus bugs. You try not to think about the latter as you notice a suspicious black fleck in your current slice. Probably pepper. Hopefully. The texture doesn't improve. You chew slower. Your jaw is doing most of the work here. Occasionally you catch a chunk of salt crystal or a bit of straw. These are not seasoning. They are what you call authentic countryside inclusions. Still, cheese is cheese. You eat it with bread, probably that same dense rye from earlier, and maybe wash it down with a sip of ale. It's not a feast. It's barely a snack. But in the lean times, it's nourishment. In the good times, it's still nourishment, just slightly less grudgingly accepted. You once heard a merchant describe cheese as milk's triumph over time. If that's true, peasant cheese is milk's revenge. You respect it. You fear it. You eat it anyway. You look around the room. Everyone else is chewing too slowly, reverently, like the cheese might explode if handled incorrectly. No one talks. The scraping of knives against wooden plates is the only sound, accompanied by the occasional sigh of digestive diplomacy. And when it's done, you feel oddly satisfied. Not because it tasted good, but because it tasted real. Like the land. Like labor. Like everything you've worked for somehow compacted into a solid triangle of barely edible defiance. You light a candle stub and sit back, hands on your stomach. It gurgles faintly. You're not sure if it's gratitude or protest. Either way, the cheese has won. Again, you wake up to rain tapping on the thatch roof. Not a thunderstorm, just a steady drizzle, the kind that turns the path to the fields into a soupy mess and makes everything smell like wet wool. You stoke the fire, stretch out your back, and hope that just maybe there's something warm to eat. There is. Sort of. Pottage. If you've never had it, think of it this way. It's soup's sad cousin who always shows up uninvited. You lift the lid of the pot hanging over the hearth and stare into a familiar swamp. Bits of barley, a few tired beans, shreds of kale, maybe an old leek stub if someone was feeling generous last night. The broth is cloudy, the color undefined, the smell not bad, not good, just there. Pottage was the default meal of the medieval working class. Morning, noon, night, it showed up again and again, sometimes thicker, sometimes thinner, but always fundamentally the same. It was what happened when you boiled whatever you had for as long as possible and called it a meal. Historians still argue whether pottage offered a balanced diet or simply kept people alive with minimal effort. Some say it was a clever, endlessly adaptable dish. Others describe it as culinary Stockholm syndrome, where you grow attached to it simply because there's nothing else. You scoop a ladleful into a wooden bowl. It steams gently. There's no meat in sight, but you do spot something that might once have been a lentil. The texture is complicated. Soft, yes, but also a little slimy, with the occasional pop from a half-boiled grain or a chunk of tuber that refused to cooperate. You dip your spoon and take a bite. It's warm. That's the main selling point. It fills your belly and quiets your hunger. But your taste buds have left the conversation entirely. They know there's nothing for them here. Sometimes the pottage was reheated for days, thickening into a paste by the end of the week. Other times, it was so thin it qualified more as broth, especially when the pantry was low. Some households added wild greens, bitter herbs, or even a splash of ale for flavor. Most just didn't bother. You remember the tale of old Elda, the village widow who once made pottage with a rabbit she caught in the cabbage patch. People still talk about it like it was the coronation feast. But that was 3 winters ago. Today's version is strictly vegetarian and strictly beige. Still, it's oddly comforting, like a blanket made of vegetables. The repetitive stirring, the familiar smell, the slow, predictable rhythm of eating it. It's soothing in its own way, a warm exhale in an otherwise cold world. You glance at the others around the table. Everyone eats in silence. No one expects anything better. Occasionally, someone lifts a spoon and mutters, "Could use salt," knowing full well there isn't any. Not today. In the monastery, you once heard a visiting friar call pottage a gift from the Lord. You're not sure if he was serious or just very hungry. Either way, you've stopped trying to assign meaning to it. It's food. It works. You finish your bowl. The last bite clings to the bottom too thick to scoop cleanly. You run a crust of bread around the edges and pop it in your mouth. One last chew. One last swallow. You're full. Not satisfied. Not delighted. Just full. Outside, the rain continues. You gather your tools, tie your cloak, and step into the mist with a belly full of food that barely qualifies as memory. And tomorrow, more pottage. You're out in the fields again, bent at the waist, pulling weeds that have no business growing this fast. The sun hangs high, but it gives off more glare than warmth. Sweat trickles down your back, and your stomach growls like a warning bell. Time for a break. You head toward the tree line where a few flat stones serve as unofficial benches. You untie the bundle of cloth tucked at your waist and open it with all the ceremony of a night unveiling treasure. Inside, one single egg, and it's not just yours. This egg, brown speckled, slightly cracked, still warm from the hen, is the shared lunch, split 5 ways. Your siblings huddle beside you, eyes locked on the prize. It's the only luxury food today, and the negotiations are intense. Eggs were precious in medieval peasant life. Chickens didn't lay daily, and when they did, you couldn't always keep the eggs. Many were taken as tithe to the Lord or sold to townfolk who could afford them. What was left you shared, like it or not. Historians still argue whether this kind of egg rationing was typical across Europe or more common in famine-prone regions. Either way, accounts are clear eggs were valuable, and eating one was a moment worth remembering. You crack it carefully into the little iron pan you brought along. It sizzles faintly over the twig fire. There's not enough fat to stop it from sticking, but you tilt the pan just right, moving the yolk to the center. You want it cooked through no risks. There's no time to argue over doneness. Once solid, you take it off the heat and cut it into 5 sad wedges with your belt knife. Each slice is about 2 bites, maybe 3 if you nibble. You pass them out like gold coins, and everyone eats in silence. You chew slowly, reverently. The yolk is a little crumbly, the white slightly rubbery, but it tastes like something. It's rich, smooth, real. For 2 minutes, this isn't a field, it's a banquet. You remember festivals where they served boiled eggs in spiced wine. That was years ago. You were barely old enough to hold the cup. But even then, the egg was the best part. Now it's fuel, fast and fleeting. You finish your slice and lick your fingers. No crumbs left, no extras. It's done. Some days you find a second egg tucked in the hay. But more often you just dream about it. Eggs were a currency, a comfort, a reminder that the chickens at least are doing their part, even if you still owe half their output to the manor. The rest of lunch. A heel of bread, maybe a few boiled greens gone soggy in their cloth wrap. It doesn't matter. The egg was the main event. Everything else is filler. You lie back on the grass for a moment, full in the way a whisper is still a sound. The wind moves through the wheat like a slow wave. Somewhere a bell rings calling you back to work. You sigh, stand, brush the crumbs from your lap, and think maybe tomorrow there'll be another egg. It's been a long day. Your hands are blistered, your feet feel like wooden planks, and your back hums with the kind of pain that makes sleep both necessary and nearly impossible. As dusk settles in, you make your way back to the cottage stomach, dragging behind you like a half-dead mule. You open the door, and there it is, a smell, smoky, acrid, and oddly leathery. Tonight's dinner is barely food. Welcome to the realm of famine cooking, where creativity and desperation hold hands and leap off the edge of reason. On the menu, boiled leather. Okay, technically, it's not a shoe, but it was a belt, or a saddle scrap, or a piece of old jerkin too cracked to wear. You've scraped the hair off, soaked it overnight, and now it bubbles gently in the pot like it's pretending to be meat. People really did this. During sieges, during famines and winters, when even bark soup was running low. Boiled leather was your last-ditch calorie source, marginally more satisfying than chewing on your own boot. Marginally. You dip your spoon in. The broth is cloudy, vaguely brown. A few scraps of dried herbs float on top like well-meaning guests who know this party is doomed. You pull up a chunk of leather. It jiggles. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or exaggerated in later folklore. But written accounts from besieged cities like Jerusalem in the First Crusade or Paris in 1870 describe boiling belts and harnesses when all else failed. The fact that it's documented in multiple eras says plenty. You take a bite. Well, not so much a bite as a prolonged chew. The texture is assertive. Rubber meets jerky. There's a faint tang from the soaking water. You're not sure your teeth are up for the challenge, but you keep going. Some recipes recommend boiling leather with vinegar to soften it. Others suggest ashes, yes, actual fireplace ash to help break it down. You did neither. You just boiled and hoped. You try not to think about what this leather touched in its previous life. A horse's flank, a sweaty armpit, a pigsty wall. Doesn't matter now. Hunger is louder than memory. You slurp another spoonful of broth. It's not terrible. It's warm. That's about all it has going for it. There's no salt, no oil, just that faintly meaty, vaguely barnyard aroma. Still, it's filling in its own miserable way. The gelatin in the leather thickens the stew. Your stomach accepts it without protest, maybe even with a shrug of reluctant gratitude. You think back to famine stories told by your grandmother, nettle soup boiled bark roasted moss. Once she tried to make flour out of acorns. It didn't go well. You still remember the sound of everyone coughing after the first bite. Compared to that, leather isn't so bad. It's just memorable. You scrape the bottom of the pot for anything that might resemble a scrap. One last chew. One last sip. The fire crackles. Your belly feels heavy and not entirely in a good way. Tomorrow, hopefully, the chickens lay. Or someone trades barley for beans. Or dare you hope there's a rabbit snare with a surprise. But for now, you lean back, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and whisper to no one in particular. Well, I ate a belt today, and somehow that feels like an accomplishment. The seasons turn as they always do, and with early summer comes a new type of challenge. Not scarcity this time, but flavor. Or rather, too much of it. You crouch near the hedgerow with a basket in hand, foraging for anything edible. Dandelions, sorrel, maybe a handful of chickweed. These are your greens for the day. Bitter herbs that look charming in storybooks and taste like ancient vengeance in real life. You pull up a clump of wild mustard leaves, tough, spiky, and smelling vaguely of pepper and feet. Back home, you'll boil these down into a sludgy side dish that's technically nutritious and undeniably unpleasant. These herbs weren't side dishes by choice. They were necessity foods, the kind you ate when you couldn't afford meat, or when the stored grains ran out, or when the chickens staged another egg strike. And they were bitter. Eye-watering, tongue-numbing bitter. Historians still argue whether these herbs were appreciated by peasants or simply tolerated. Some believe people grew to like them, seasoning them with vinegar or sour ale. Others think they were the medieval equivalent of punishment food, what you ate when you couldn't scrounge anything else. You dump the greens into a pot with some water and a pinch of last year's salt. They boil quickly, releasing a smell that's somewhere between earthy and hostile. You taste a spoonful. It bites back. Wild greens weren't just bitter, they were dangerous. Pick the wrong leaf and you'd spend the next day doubled over in the corner. Mistake hemlock for wild chervil. That's not a nap, it's your funeral. Your neighbor once mixed in a pretty sprig of foxglove because it looked fresh. He couldn't feel his hands for 2 days. And even the safe ones weren't always safe. Nettle, for instance. Yes, stinging nettle was often boiled into soups and teas. It's healthy, sure, but it also fights you on the way in. You have to wear gloves just to pick it. Dinner shouldn't require protective gear. Today's mix is relatively tame. Dock leaves, bittercress, maybe some yarrow. The kind of greens that promise iron and deliver tears. You chew through a mouthful, grimacing. The texture is slippery. The aftertaste lingers like regret. The children don't like it. You don't blame them. but they eat it anyway. Because you said the magic words, it's good for you. One time, a traveling priest said bitter herbs were sacred, a symbol of humility and gratitude. You tried to believe him right up until you found a caterpillar curled in your bowl. Still, these herbs kept people alive, especially in spring when stored foods had run out and the new harvest hadn't come in yet. You could gather a full meal's worth in an hour if you knew where to look. And if your hands weren't covered in nettle stings by the end, you probably did it wrong. You finish your bowl. There's a sour film on your teeth. Your lips pucker involuntarily. The children groan, but they don't leave a bite behind. Waste nothing, ever. The pot is nearly empty. You scrape it clean with a hunk of bread if you have one. If not, you just drink the leftover broth and try not to make a face. It's not a meal you'll remember fondly, but you'll remember it, and the bitterness, it lingers. After days of rain, the water from the well starts to taste wrong. Not foul exactly, but faintly earthy, like something's been sitting in it too long. You drink anyway. What choice do you have, and hope for the best? But if you're lucky, today's beverage isn't water. It's beer. And not the kind served in frosty mugs at a tavern with roasted meat and laughter echoing off stone walls. No, this is small beer, the watery, low-alcohol peasant version brewed in your own kitchen with leftover grains and a prayer that the barley wasn't too moldy. Believe it or not, beer was often the healthiest thing medieval farmers drank. Water could be contaminated. Milk spoiled fast. Fruit juice was non-existent unless you lived in a vineyard. But beer was boiled, fermented, slightly antiseptic, a miracle in a mug. Historians still argue whether beer truly protected peasants from disease or simply replaced worse options. Some claim the fermentation process killed harmful microbes. Others suggest the alcohol content was too low to matter much, and that people just drank gallons of it to feel anything. You lift a mug, it's cloudy, lukewarm, and barely carbonated. The color is somewhere between amber and ditch. It smells faintly of grain husk and wet straw. You sip, and honestly, it's not that bad. Small beer has body. It has presence. And more importantly, it has calories. In a life where meals are thin and work is constant, every drop of liquid bread helps. You remember helping your cousin brew a batch. She used a cracked wooden tub, scorched barley, and stale bread ends to stretch the mash. The result was functional. Sort of sour, a bit fizzy, but definitely not poison. That's the best you can hope for. It pairs well with bread, with cheese, with pretty much anything really. Even turnips, though they put up a fight. Some days when the stew is thin and the air hangs heavy with sweat, you drink beer for dinner. It fills you faster than soup and doesn't require chewing. Ideal for lazy exhaustion. Kids drink it too. Don't be shocked, small beer barely had any alcohol, sometimes as little as 1%. It was safer than water, and sometimes even flavored with herbs or honey if you happen to live next door to a beekeeper, which of course you don't. You pour another cup. The head fizzes briefly, then disappears like your hope for variety in tomorrow's meals. You drink slowly. Let it coat your throat. It's not refreshing, but it's oddly satisfying. A warmth spreads from your belly outward, and for a second you forget what your last bath smelled like. Beer was more than a beverage. It was culture, currency, tradition. Monks perfected it. Towns taxed it. Women brewed it at home often better than the professionals. It was both sacred and mundane, a drink for every occasion, including boredom. Some households brewed a new batch every week. Others reused the same grains 3 or 4 times, each brew weaker than the last. By the final go, it was basically flavored water, but still preferable to whatever was trickling out of the moss-covered well in the village square. You set down your mug, now empty. You don't feel drunk. You don't even feel buzzed. But you do feel slightly better, hydrated, anchored, ready to face another evening of boiled something or other. You smile faintly, raise the mug to no one, and whisper, to not dying of thirst. And that's a toast worth making. This morning's meal is humble, even by your low standards. You sit cross-legged on a rough plank near the hearth, tearing into a flat, dry disc of what might generously be called bread. It's made from oats, or at least the parts of oats the miller didn't bother keeping. Welcome to the joyless miracle that is the unsweetened oat cake. These aren't the chewy golden store-bought treats with raisins and a charming backstory. No, these are hard, thin slabs of baked grain paste. They snap, they flake, they taste like the roof of your mouth on a dusty day. Oats were the grain of choice in many parts of medieval Europe, especially Scotland, Ireland, and colder northern regions, because they thrived in terrible soil and didn't need much sunlight or love. But oats don't rise. They don't fluff. They just submit. Historians still argue whether oatcakes were ever enjoyed or merely endured. Some accounts praise their filling nature. Others describe them as sad bread meant to be eaten with a frown and a wooden spoon of humility. You take a bite. It doesn't crumble, it shatters. The edges are rough, the center dry as sand. There's no honey, no butter, no jam, no anything. Just grain, pressed, baked, and regretted. Worse still, it's cold. No one had time to warm the cakes this morning. The fire was needed for broth, and by the time the coals were free, breakfast was already being chewed through like a job assignment. You dunk a corner into weak beer to soften it, which works for about 5 seconds before it goes back to being edible drywall. Oatcakes were the everyday fallback food, easy to carry to the fields, stackable in baskets, and technically non-perishable. But they were also tasteless, brittle, and capable of turning your teeth to powder if you weren't careful. You remember last year when a cousin tried to add a splash of milk to the mix. It helped. Briefly. But then the cakes spoiled too fast and went moldy by midweek. Lesson learned: flavor equals risk. So now it's back to plain cakes, stamped out on a hot stone or griddle turned once then left to cool. They don't rot. They don't bend. They just are. Some households sprinkle in herbs. Others mix in chopped onion or crumbled turnip. Your family doesn't. There's no time. No extras. Just flour and water. Maybe a whisper of salt if someone got lucky at market. Still, they keep you going. There's something to be said for the quiet utility of oatcakes. They won't win any awards, but they fill your gut cleanly and completely. And once your mouth adjusts to the dryness, they're almost meditative to eat. You gnaw the last corner and glance at the stack left on the board. That's your lunch too, maybe even dinner. They store well in cloth sacks. You can slip them into your pocket like edible coasters. And tomorrow you'll make more. Mix the batter. Shape the discs. Bake them until they're just this side of edible. No seasoning, no surprises. Just oats. Just enough. There's something ominous about tonight's dinner. Not because it's dangerous, at least not immediately, but because it's moving. Or was. Recently. And it's still hissing a little in the crock. You lift the lid and wince. It's fermented cabbage again, or something adjacent to it. A treat, they call it. A preserved food passed down from ancestors who didn't have refrigerators, but did have questionable taste. You spoon some into a wooden bowl. It lands with a wet thwack. The smell hits like a cartload of pickled socks. Sharp, vinegary, a bit animal. Welcome to the mysterious world of medieval fermentation, where good food went bad on purpose and people smiled through it. Sauerkraut, pickled onions, turnip slush, fermented garlic paste. These weren't condiments, they were survival strategies, and sometimes weirdly celebrations. Historians still argue whether fermentation was more about taste or preservation. Some say peasants enjoyed the sour tang of cabbage aged for weeks in wooden barrels. Others think they just tolerated it because the alternative was winter scurvy or chewing bark. Tonight's batch is cabbage-based. It was shredded, salted, and packed into a stoneware crock with a flat rock for a lid. It's been sitting near the hearth for 3 weeks, slowly bubbling and attracting concerned glances. You spear a stringy bite with your knife and pop it in your mouth. It crunches. It squirms figuratively. The flavor is strong like vinegar's grumpy older brother. Your jaw tightens reflexively. Your eyes water just a little. But here's the thing. It's good for you. Probably. Fermentation adds vitamin C, keeps the gut healthy, and most importantly, makes old vegetables edible again. So, yes, it smells like something died politely, but it might be the most nutritious thing you've eaten all month. Still, the texture is a journey. Some strands are limp. Others still have some snap. Occasionally, you hit an air pocket that fizzes. You pretend you didn't notice. Everyone else is doing the same. Then there are the side dishes, maybe some pickled turnips, which taste like spicy regret, or fermented barley paste, which has the consistency of sadness, but adds protein. Once your neighbor tried pickling eggs. You still have nightmares about the smell. These fermented treats are as common as they are unloved, but they show up every week, especially in winter and spring. They're your insurance against rot, your backup plan when nothing else survived the frost. And yes, you eat them cold because warming them just makes the smell worse. You chase a bite with beer. It helps. A little. You remember once hearing a friar claim that fermented foods cleansed the spirit. If true, your spirit is getting the pressure wash of its life tonight. You push your bowl away and lean back. Your stomach gurgles not unhappily, just inquisitively. The fermentation has begun its next phase inside you. You smile faintly. These foods weren't joyful, but they were a strange kind of clever. They used time and salt and patience to stretch the seasons, bridge the hunger months, and whisper to nature, "Nice try, but we're still here." And tomorrow when you lift that crock again, it'll smell even stronger. And yes, you'll eat it. Again. The year turns slowly, like the grinding of a worn-out millstone. You've gone from frost-bitten mornings to muddy springs, from dusty summer fields to chill autumn winds. The crops have come and gone. The animals have thinned. The days are shorter now, and so is the food. But one thing has stayed with you like a shadow at every meal: the 4 worst foods you've eaten again and again, season after season. Each one a flavor of necessity, a texture of survival, the brick-hard winter bread so dense it could double as self-defense. It was your shield against hunger even when it shredded your gums and turned your jaw to powder. You soaked it. You steamed it. You prayed over it. And still it tasted like someone baked regret into a stone. The gruel thin, soupy, and loyal as an old dog. Always there, always bland, always just enough. It was warmth without flavor, routine without joy. It taught you the quiet art of chewing nothing, the salt fish with its relentless saltiness and leathery chew. It turned your lips to paper and your thirst into a constant aching echo. It was a slab of ocean preserved in brine and defiance, eaten only because it wouldn't rot and couldn't escape. And of course, the turnip, that humble, knobbly symbol of resignation. It boiled, baked, and fermented its way into nearly every season, never flavorful, never absent. You peeled it with hope and cooked it with fatigue. You ate it because it was always there. These four, the bread, the gruel, the fish, the root, have fed you through famine plagues and wet seasons. Not well, but consistently. They filled the silence between better meals. And sometimes they were the better meal. Historians still argue whether these foods were the worst by taste or simply by reputation. But in your bones you know the truth, they were the worst because they never left you alone. Because they were the flavors of always being almost full, almost safe, almost content. Tonight you sit by the hearth, the pot bubbling quietly behind you, and you think about all the ways you've stretched a meal, pickled it, dried it, mashed it, prayed over it. You think about the days when nothing came from the fields but rocks and worms, and you still managed to eat something. Your fingers trace the rim of your bowl. Inside, a bit of boiled oatcake crumbled into beer with a spoonful of pickled cabbage slumped against the side. It's strange, familiar, almost comforting now. Because somehow through the blandness and bitterness, the salt and the sour you've endured. And if the turnips keep growing, you'll endure some more. And now, with your belly warmed by simple food and your thoughts softened by memory, let it all go. The wind outside has quieted. The fire's low now, just a dull orange glow flickering over soot-darkened stones. Your hands are still your breath, slow and steady. The bowl beside you is empty. The night is full. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to feel worn. That's the rhythm of this life. Slow, steady, cyclical. The hunger comes and so does the harvest. The days get short and then they grow again. And you keep moving forward one modest meal at a time. Let the weight in your shoulders melt into the mattress. Let your jaw unclench, your fingers relax. The food is gone, but the warmth stays with you. You did enough today. More than enough. Think about the quiet hum of that old pot on the fire. Think about the creak of the bench under your legs, the scent of the herbs drying in the rafters. Think about that last bite of bread, even if it cracked a tooth. You made it through another year of hard food and harder days. And here you are, still breathing, still full of stories of resilience. Of a simple kind of strength. Sleep now, peasant. You've earned it. Or manure. Possibly both. No one's really sure anymore. What you do know is that peasants rarely owned shoes, and if they did, they guarded them like treasure. Leather was expensive. Repairs were a luxury. Most just went without, especially indoors and especially in winter, because your precious one pair would just rot faster from the slush and muck. So barefoot it is. To cope, people layered the floor with straw. or rushes, or reeds, or moss, whatever was handy. These were meant to absorb the damp trap some heat and give your souls something to sink into other than puddles and pig droppings. Trouble is, it rarely worked. The straw soaked through quickly, and unless you swept it out regularly, which most didn't or couldn't, you were just walking on compost in the making. Historians still argue whether these floor coverings were changed weekly, monthly, or only when they started sprouting mushrooms. You spot something moving in the straw, something small. You freeze. It freezes. For a moment, the two of you regard each other mammal to mammal. Then it skitters into a gap near the firewood stack. A rat, or a mouse, or something that used to be a rat but now glows faintly from chewing on spoiled onions and herbal tonic residue. The kids start to stir. You hear a sniffle, then a cough, then the unmistakable sound of someone sleep-kicking their sibling square in the back. You sigh. Your little brother rolls over, opens one eye, and pulls straw from his mouth. You can tell from his face he has no plans to move today. Honestly, who can blame him? But you're already up. You're the responsible one. You're the one who's going to fetch water, feed the pig, gather kindling, and probably dig out the family's last turnip from under the frozen floorboards. Not because you want to, but because if you don't, nobody else will. And your mother is already side-eyeing the cold fire with the look that ends conversations. Before that, though, you try to fix the straw. You grab a pitchfork, more of a stick, with a few bent nails hammered into one end, and attempt to fluff the worst parts of the floor. There's a dark patch near the back wall that smells like regret and spoiled soup. You shove some new straw over it. Problem solved. In some huts, especially in slightly better off homes, floors were made of something called cob, a mixture of mud dung and straw stomped down to form a semi-permanent surface. In theory, this was more durable. In practice, it was still cold, still cracked, and still smelled like someone's backside. But it didn't squish underfoot, so that was a plus. You remember hearing about rich folk like castle-level rich who had wooden floors, polished ones even, and rugs, real rugs. You try to picture it: no mud, no straw, no mystery patches, just smooth, dry floorboards, a fire roaring in the hearth, a chair with legs that didn't wobble, a life with socks. It's too much. Your brain starts to steam. You shake off the dream and return to your reality. The pig is snorting near the door. It wants out, or maybe in. Honestly, it doesn't matter. It's going to do what it wants, and you're just living in its house. You unlatch the wooden bar holding the door shut and let the outside in. A blast of cold hits you in the chest, the kind that reaches down your spine and reminds you that your tunic has holes in it, and you forgot to mend them. Again. Mud. The entire yard is just one large malicious puddle. You step into it because what choice do you have? You were already dirty. Now you're just wetter. And that truly is how every medieval peasant day begins, barefoot on a floor that wants to swallow your toes, wrapped in a tunic that smells like old meat, greeted by a wind that thinks your soul is too warm. You'd think a house would be yours, that it would at least belong to the humans who live in it. But no, not this hut. This one belongs to everyone and everything that fits through the door. And that includes the livestock. There's no barn out back, no cozy stable, just the hut. And in winter, the animals sleep inside with you. Not because it's charming like a children's book, but because it's necessary. They provide warmth. They're assets. And if they freeze or get stolen or wander off into the woods to pursue an independent lifestyle, you're ruined. So the pig sleeps by the fire, curled like a giant grunting bread loaf. The goats shove themselves under the bench, nibbling at the straw on the floor because they don't really understand boundaries. And the chicken roosts wherever she feels like it, usually above someone's head on a ceiling beam that sags visibly when she lands. Sometimes she falls off in the middle of the night. You've woken up to feathers in your mouth more times than you can count. This morning, the goat has knocked over the firewood pile. Again. You sigh. She's chewing on a sock, your sock specifically, and looks at you like you're the intruder. You try to wrestle it from her mouth, but she's stronger than she looks and clearly enjoys the tug of war. You lose. She trots off victorious, and you make a mental note to wear the other one twice as long to make up for it. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants actually kept all their livestock indoors in winter, or if it was just the most impoverished who did. But honestly, considering how flimsy the fences are and how determined wolves can be, it makes sense. These animals are everything. Milk, meat, eggs, even manure for the garden. If you don't bring them in, you might not make it to spring. But cohabiting with barn animals brings its own issues. Noise for one. The pig snores like a blacksmith with a sinus infection. The goats bleat randomly at shadows. And the chicken, that cursed chicken, clucks at 3 a.m. like it's her job to announce ghosts. Then there's the smell. The hut doesn't have windows. Just slits in the walls, maybe a hole in the roof if you're lucky. Which means all that wonderful animal aroma stays right where it is. Warm, damp, rich. You breathe it in with every meal. It infuses your clothes. If you left the village, people would probably smell you before they saw you. And that's saying something, because your tunic is bright orange from carrot soup accidents. And we haven't even talked about the bugs. Fleas, lice, mites, and mysterious tiny creatures that may or may not have wings. They love it in here. It's warm. It's dark. There are goats to nibble, pigs to burrow into, and humans with unwashed hair. You scratch at your neck absent-mindedly. There it is again, that tingle. The ancient peasant shrug, half exhaustion, half resignation. The hut is noisy now. The animals are up pacing and complaining about the cold. Your sister is trying to milk the goat indoors, which is never a good idea, and your brother is eating something off the floor that might have once been bread, or at least bread adjacent. You glance outside. Snow is starting to fall. Again. It's not even proper snow, just that slushy, half-melted kind that soaks through your sleeves and then laughs about it. The chicken tries to peck your foot. You grab a stool, really just a stump with 3 legs, and plop down near the hearth, trying to take it all in without losing your mind. This is life. Every morning. Every winter. You don't know any different. And yet there are weirdly comforting parts. The pig's warmth is real, and the goats occasionally let you use them as leg warmers. You've learned to sleep through the bleating and crowing and snorting. In fact, on the rare night when all the animals are quiet, you find it unsettling. Like something's wrong, like the world has gone silent before the end. Even the mess becomes background noise. You know which patch of floor is safest to walk on, which corner leaks least during a storm, where the chicken prefers to drop her eggs. It's like a bizarre, muddy ballet you've rehearsed your whole life. Still, there are days when you dream of clean floors, of no hooves on your blanket, of socks that don't taste like goat breath. But not today. Today you've got chores to do, wood to fetch, and a pig to chase before she finds the onion stash again. One day at a time. Drip. You hear it before you feel it. One, then another, and then another. Somewhere above your head, the thatched roof has finally surrendered to the unrelenting damp. You look up slowly, your eyes tracing the darkened streaks along the beams, and there it is, a fat, swollen drop forming at the tip of a straw knot. You blink just as it falls, right onto your forehead. You don't even flinch anymore. It's been leaking for weeks, maybe longer. Thatch doesn't last forever, especially not in winter. It was patched once last autumn when your uncle climbed up with a bundle of reeds and nearly slipped to his death. He tied them and mumbled something about divine protection and declared it done. The hole naturally was somewhere else. That's the problem with medieval roofing. It's more of a suggestion than a structure. Thatch bundles of straw or reeds gets layered thickly to keep out rain and snow, but wind always finds a way. Snow melts, water seeps, mold creeps. Historians still argue whether peasants reinforced their roofs yearly or only when things got really soggy. But judging by the musty smell wafting through your hut, you're betting on the latter. You grab a bucket. Not that it'll help much since you only own two, and one's currently doubling as the goat's water dish. But you position it beneath the leak and listen to the soft plink-plink like a sad lullaby for the tired and wet. Meanwhile, the wind outside picks up. It squeezes through the cracks in the wattle walls like it's trying to sneak in for warmth. The entire hut groans. You feel a draft creep up your back, and suddenly the pig at your feet doesn't seem like the worst company after all. Your mother is cursing softly in the corner, tying a cloth around a different leak, using what might have once been someone's undergarments. Your father, ever the optimist, is poking at the back wall with a stick, checking for soft spots. There are many. Then a louder thump above. A section of thatch has loosened. You know what that means? More drips, more drafts, and possibly a roosting hen falling directly onto your dinner tonight. Again. Roof maintenance is a winter pastime. You gather more reeds when you can, binding them into thick fraying ropes with whatever twine isn't holding your pants up. On warmer days, meaning days when your breath doesn't freeze solid, you climb up there with a friend holding the ladder, which is actually just a stack of barrels, and you pray. Loudly. The trick is in the angle. Thatch has to be laid just right to drain water like scales on a fish. Too flat and the rain sits. Too steep and the whole bundle slides off in a wet whoosh the next time the wind gets cheeky. You learned this the hard way when the entire roof peeled like a banana during a summer storm 2 years ago. For now, you press your hand against the beam. It's slick, cold. You withdraw it and sniff your palm. Yep. Mold. Delightful. Some richer folk, if you can call anyone in the village, rich, might have tiled roofs or wooden shingles. Those are rare. Luxury. Like sugar, or socks with matching heels. You heard once that monasteries used actual lead to seal their rooftops. Imagine a roof that doesn't leak. Must be magic. You squint upward again. The beam above you is swelling, the wood darkening like a bruise. It's only a matter of time before something drips, collapses, or grows its own ecosystem. You joke half seriously that if the roof ever falls in, you'll just declare the hut open air and carry on. The sky at least doesn't charge rent. Back near the hearth, someone sneezes. Loud, then again, then a chorus. Must be the damp air. There's nothing like the combination of cold mildew and animal breath to encourage a good case of the shivers. You tug your cloak tighter around your shoulders. It's wool if you're lucky and woven thick, heavy, scratched by the goat, once torn by a bramble twice, and now patched with a chunk of your uncle's old hat. But it's warmish, better than nothing. You notice the smoke has found a new path curling slowly from the hearth up into the same beam that's leaking. You stare at it for a moment, then sigh. One problem at a time. So you move the bedroll again. This is the third time in a week you've had to shuffle your sleeping spot to avoid drip smoke or falling livestock. At this point, you've basically rotated through every quadrant of the hut and have found that the least damp spot is precisely where the pig likes to sleep. She looks at you now with knowing eyes as if to say, "Try me." You don't. Instead, you drag your blanket to the other side, curl up in your new temporary corner, and count the drips like stars on a clouded night. 1, 2, 3. You shift your legs carefully, trying not to kick anyone in the face. Not out of politeness, there's no room for that here, but simply because if you wake someone up, they'll complain, loudly. And nobody needs that. Everyone's in the same bed. That's how it works. One lumpy straw-stuffed mattress, if you can call it that, spread out on a wooden platform, or more often directly on the dirt. You sleep side by side, elbows jabbing ribs, knees bumping backs. Occasionally, someone's foot pressed firmly against your cheek. Comfort is a myth. Personal space is an illusion. But warmth? That's real. Body heat is the only central heating you've got. It's a family pile, chaotic and unavoidable. Mother, father, siblings, maybe a grandparent if they're still alive and cranky. The baby, of course, gets the middle, the warmest spot, and somehow still manages to squirm sideways and steal all the blanket. Your head rests on a sack of something grain maybe, or wool, possibly rocks. It's hard to tell in the dark. You adjust it and inhale deeply, which turns out to be a mistake. The scent is somewhere between stale stew and wet dog. You turn it over and try again. The blanket, one scratchy wool thing shared among 6 people, does its best. But it's too short. Someone's always got cold feet. Tonight it's you. You curl up tighter and try not to think about the pig snuffling nearby. Historians still argue how common this sort of communal sleeping really was. Some suggest it was limited to the poorest families. Others claim it was standard practice, even in wealthier peasant homes. Regardless, from experience, one bed, many people. It's warm, it's noisy, and it's absolutely infested with lice. You scratch absently at your scalp. Again. There's something uniquely humiliating about being the big spoon to a goat. But here you are trying to inch away from her without waking her up. She's warm, sure, but she's also slightly damp and has the breath of 1,000 moldy turnips. Someone kicks you. You grunt. They grunt back. The universal peasant bedtime dialogue. Above you, the wind continues its operatic performance. The walls creak. The roof rustles ominously. A rooster crows confused because of course it does. You close your eyes and try to drift off, focusing on anything except the fact that your arm is currently under 3 other bodies and has gone completely numb. Your dreams are strange. Always are. Something about a giant loaf of bread you can't quite reach, or perhaps a stream of warm bathwater that never gets any closer. You startle awake around midnight when the baby wails and someone else farts loudly. No one apologizes. No one even moves. This is just life. In some parts of Europe, it's said people even shared beds with guests or travelers, especially in winter, because more bodies meant more heat. You're glad you don't have visitors tonight. The last time that happened, a merchant with a suspicious cough snored so loud the goat refused to lie down for a week. You wonder what it must be like to sleep alone, in your own bed, on clean linens, with a feather pillow. You've heard of those feather pillows, filled with the softest down from special geese raised in faraway places. You've even imagined one before fluffy cool supporting your neck just right. Then someone rolls over and knees you in the stomach and the dream is gone. The mattress crunches beneath you. Straw old rags, maybe some moss, whatever was available when it was last refreshed, which was based on the smell roughly one festival ago. It's probably harboring a small civilization of beetles. You've given up trying to fight it. The blanket slips off your shoulder. You try to tug it back, but someone has cocooned themselves in the middle. You sigh. A rat scurries across the rafters overhead. Or maybe a mouse. You give it a name. Bernard. He seems reliable. Outside, it's snowing harder now. You can feel the chill pushing in around the edges of the hut. But in here, it's a mixture of smoke, sweat, hay dust, and pig breath. You wrap your arms around yourself and try to sleep again. You will dream most likely of food, or warmth, or being able to stretch your legs without someone yelling at you. But mostly food. And in the morning, you'll all wake up tangled together, a wriggling pile of half-rested, half-frozen humanity, blinking into the smoky half-light of another brutal peasant day. You don't want to deal with the chamber pot. No one ever does. But it's there, silently judging you from the corner, half full, a little tilted, threatening to tip if the pig nudges it even slightly. You hope she doesn't. You don't need that kind of chaos before dawn. It's cold, it's dark, and the last thing you want is to crawl across the muddy floor to empty it. But nature calls. Repeatedly. And unlike noble castles with stone privies or monasteries with strategically placed outhouses, you've got a single cracked clay pot with a handle and a smell so strong it could be bottled and used as a weapon. You pull the blanket off reluctantly. Your legs protest. Your spine pops like an old door hinge. But you shuffle across the straw, dodging elbows, pigtails, and the firewood pile, which seems to move of its own accord. You lift the lid, immediately regret it. There's no dignity here. No ventilation either. You do your business, trying not to breathe through your nose, and wince as the cold of the clay kisses your skin like a vengeful ghost. The pig watches. That somehow makes it worse. You screw the lid back on more wishful thinking than effective seal and place the pot carefully back in the corner. It sloshes. You gag. It's going to have to be emptied. Not now, but soon. Preferably before someone knocks it over with a foot or elbow, or the chicken perches on it again. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were routinely cleaned or just replaced when the smell began to cause hallucinations. You suspect it was a little of both. The medieval peasant day doesn't wait for sunrise. You're up before the light, not because you're ambitious, but because that's when everything else starts moving. The pig wants out. The goat is chewing on someone's hair. Your father is mumbling prayers while slipping his frozen feet into shoes made of hope and wet leather. You draw the short straw. You'll be the one to empty the pot. You brace yourself, lift it carefully, and head for the door. The cold outside hits like a slap. The slush around the doorway has frozen into jagged ridges, perfect for twisting an ankle or spilling, say, a chamber pot full of misery. You walk slowly foot by frozen foot, holding the pot like it's a sacred relic from a very gross cult. Outside the hut, the cold is so intense it burns. Your breath comes in fast clouds. Your hands ache. You make your way to the back of the property behind the straw fence that leans just slightly more every day. There's a designated spot, basically a hole in the ground with a few moldy planks over it. You pour quickly. The splash is revolting. You don't look. You cover it with a handful of snow and a prayer, then turn back toward the hut. It's only been minutes, but you're already shaking. On your way back, you see your neighbor. She's crouching by her own pile of snow, rubbing her hands together. Her smile is tight but knowing. Everyone understands. Chamber pot duty rotates like a curse. Tomorrow it will be someone else's turn, probably your little brother. You make a mental note to not remind him. Back inside, the fire has caught properly, and the room is now equal parts smoky and slightly less frigid. The pig is snoring again. The goat has climbed onto the bed, no one knows how, and no one's going to make her get down. You place the chamber pot back in its corner, empty now, but still ominous, like it's planning something. Your mother hands you a cloth. You wipe your hands. You wipe them again. Doesn't help. Someone sneezes. You sit down by the fire, curl your toes into the edge of the hearth, and watch the flames flicker through your breath. You're tired already, and it's not even breakfast. But the pot is empty. That's something. You'll fill it again later. Of course you will. You're hungry. You were probably born hungry. In this life, it's a background hum, like the wind through the thatch or the snoring pig. You get used to it. You even make jokes about it. But right now, your stomach is growling with an extra edge, a kind of warning growl, the sort wolves make before they bite. You stand and stretch, bones cracking, and make your way to the food corner, if such a place can be said to exist in a one-room hut where everything overlaps. It's just a wooden chest in the shadows, its lid warped and its insides questionable. You lift it carefully. The smell hits first old grain, faint mildew, and something that might once have been cheese. Inside, a sack of oats, a crock of butter with an odd crust forming, and a suspicious lump of something wrapped in cloth. You nudge it. It doesn't nudge back. That's promising. This is what food storage looks like in a medieval peasant hut. No shelves, no refrigeration, no sealed containers. Just hope habit and the occasional mouse patrol. You shake the oat sack. It rustles like treasure. Maybe half a bowl's worth left. Enough for a thin porridge if you water it down and pretend you weren't planning to do that anyway. Your mother's already setting the iron pot over the fire, her hands moving with weary precision. She doesn't measure. She just knows. A scoop of oats, a bit of water, a pinch of salt if you're lucky, and by lucky, we mean someone forgot to trade it for eggs last week. There's no milk today. The goat's been uncooperative, possibly in protest of the chicken stealing her sleeping spot. Butter. Maybe. It's hard to tell if it's still good. You scrape the top and smell it. Close enough. You toss in a few dried peas. They clatter like pebbles a poor man's way to bulk out the mix. And herbs. Well, if there's anything green and not moldy in the corner of the chest, you can call it seasoning. Historians still argue about how well peasants preserved food in winter. Some claim there were elaborate techniques, smoking, salting, burying in straw. Others suggest it was mostly trial and error, with error often leading to stomachaches and mysterious fevers. Judging by the bloated bag of beans in the back of the chest, you lean toward the latter. You stir the pot slowly, rhythmically, like your life depends on it. It might. This is the only meal until evening. Maybe longer if the pig gets into the pantry again. The room starts to fill with a smell. Not a good smell necessarily, but a familiar one. Warm oat singed butter, a hint of old onion clinging to the pot's iron belly. Your stomach makes that desperate noise again. Everyone hears it. No one says anything. The baby starts to cry. Your sister distracts her with a wooden spoon and some very passionate humming. The pig grunts once, then settles. The goat has taken up a proud position in front of the fire, looking like she owns the place. She probably does. You ladle out the porridge into wooden bowls if you have enough. If not, someone eats from a ladle, and the rest share by passing the pot around. 1 mouthful each. 2 if the ladle's generous. You eat quickly, like the warmth might disappear if you linger. It's not good. It's barely edible. But it's warm and it stays in your belly. You feel it spread a soft burn against the cold inside you. You even close your eyes for a moment, letting the steam rise over your cheeks like a poor man's spa treatment. You remember last year's feast day. Someone brought bread from town, actual bread with a crust and everything. You remember the sound it made when torn crisp airy. You swore you'd never forget it. You already have. Now it's oats. Just oats. Maybe forever. In the corner you hear rustling. A mouse, probably. Or Bernard again. You hope he's just browsing. Last week he found the butter and passed out inside it. That was a complicated morning. You finish your bowl and wipe it clean with your thumb, then your sleeve, then a bit of leftover bread crust so stale it doubles as a spoon. Waste nothing. You look around. Everyone's doing the same. No one complains. There's nothing to complain about. This is normal. And tomorrow, if the chest is empty and the pot stays cold, you'll still find a way to eat. Maybe onion broth. Maybe acorn mush. Maybe just hot water with a dash of hope. But not today. Today you had porridge. Real porridge. And that, by peasant standards, makes it a pretty decent morning. You think the smoke is following you on purpose. There's no chimney. That would be a luxury like fresh socks, or owning both halves of a spoon. In your hut, the smoke simply rises up from the hearth and drifts around the ceiling like a confused ghost looking for the exit that isn't there. Eventually, some of it finds the hole in the roof. The rest decides to settle into your lungs, your clothes, and your pores. You cough lightly then, again harder this time. Your eyes sting. Your nose runs. The baby sneezes, prompting a chorus of other sneezes from the bed pile. You wave your hand in front of your face, but it only stirs the smoke into new and interesting directions. Now it's in your left eye instead of your right. Variety is the spice of medieval life after all. Still, you stay close to the fire. It's the only source of warmth in the hut, and the day outside is offering nothing but freezing fog and the kind of wind that chews on fingers. You shift closer, trying not to sit on the pig again. She's blending into the shadows like a large grumpy footstool. The pot from breakfast is still on the hearth. There's a bit of porridge crust stuck to the bottom now, blackened and crackling from the low flames. It smells like regret. You scrape it with a stick, not because you're hungry, but because you like the sound. Cooking in this hut is an adventure every single day. There's no counter, no cupboards, no shelves stacked with carefully labeled jars. Your pantry is a series of sacks, baskets, and crocks shoved into whatever dry corner you can find. Your kitchen tools include a battered iron pot, a wooden ladle with half the handle missing, and a knife so dull it now functions more as a spatula. You squat near the hearth, feeding it tiny twigs. The bigger logs are for emergencies, or at least less normal emergencies. Twigs first, then splinters, then maybe that broken bit of chair leg from last summer. You watch the flames greedily lap at the fuel. They never seem satisfied. And then there's the smoke again. It clings to the rafters in thick, slow sheets. Everything it touches turns brown. The walls, the ceiling, your face, your lungs. It seeps into the very fabric of your life, literally, since your clothes haven't been washed since the harvest festival. Historians still debate whether early peasant huts had ventilation built intentionally, maybe a vent in the roof, a gap in the eaves. But even if it existed, it was probably blocked with straw by someone desperate to stay warm. Airflow versus frostbite medieval engineering at its finest. You remember stories about castles and manors with chimneys. Real ones. Stone-lined, beautifully built, designed to whisk smoke away like magic. Some even had flues that could be opened or closed with little iron levers. You once saw a traveling monk sketch one in the dust. It looked like a tower for smoke. You asked if it made the air clean. He laughed and said it made the nobles feel clean. You take another breath. Your throat rasps. The goat sneezes, then looks at you accusingly. Everything smells like fire. Not the good kind either. More like forgotten stew boiled over charcoal fire, or wet wool next to a torch fire. You can't remember the last time your nose smelled something that wasn't wood smoke or damp straw. Still, the fire gives more than it takes. Without it, you'd all be icicles by now, frozen in a tableau of daily misery, goat, pig child, and adult alike, preserved forever in a hut of permafrost. So you poke it, you stoke it, you feed it, you accept it. It's fickle. One day it burns hot and clear. The next it sulks and fills the hut with choking smoke despite your best efforts. You've tried everything, changing the kindling, shifting the pot angle, chanting a few hopeful curses. Nothing helps. It's alive in its own way. This is the art of medieval cooking and heating, coaxing a semi-reliable flame from damp wood inside a smoke box while trying not to asphyxiate yourself. There are days when you miss the summer even with the flies and the stench, simply because cooking outdoors didn't leave your eyes watering like you'd just been dumped by a village bard. You cough again, rub your face. Then finally you give up and step outside for a breath of fresh, frozen air. It burns your nostrils like vinegar, but it's clean. You stand there half shivering, half thankful, while your clothes reabsorb the cold they'd only just started to shake off. You look up. The smoke curls from the hut's hole like a snake from a cave. The hut creaks, groans, exhales. You sigh your breath mingling with the smoke above. Then you head back inside. You step back into the hut, and immediately your feet make that horrible sound again, squelch. The floor still hasn't dried. Of course it hasn't. Nothing dries in winter. Not clothes, not firewood, and certainly not the rag you've been using to wipe the goat's feet every time she wanders through a puddle and tracks it back inside like it's her personal runway. You look over at your tunic, hanging limply on a wooden peg near the fire. It's been there for 2 days, suspended like a sad medieval prayer flag, still damp, still stiff, still giving off that sour sheep smell that seems to linger in every fiber of woolen clothing that's ever gotten truly wet. You poke it just to check. Still damp, of course. You sigh and pull it over your head anyway. Wool, you've been told, is warm even when wet. And that might be true in the technical sense, but in practice, it feels like wrapping yourself in a sponge dipped in goat soup. The sleeves drag slightly heavy with humidity. You adjust the neckline, rough, itchy, and always off-center, and try not to think about how many days it's been since this thing saw a stream. Not that washing it would help. Washing in winter is a nightmare. You'd have to break through the ice at the stream scrub the clothes with a rock or an old brush, then hang them out in the wind like frozen flags until they became vaguely solid again. Then you'd bring them inside to thaw, where they'd spend a week draped over beams dripping on the pig. So most people just don't. They air things out, which really means beating the garment against a wall a few times and calling it a day. Maybe sprinkle a bit of ash or lavender if you're feeling fancy, or if it's feast day and you want to impress someone with your less awful aroma. Historians still argue whether peasants regularly laundered their clothes in winter. Some evidence suggests communal washing days were scheduled around major religious festivals, but most agree that daily hygiene wasn't exactly a medieval strong point. You'd like to think your tunic still has some of last Easter's soap clinging to it. Somewhere, probably near the hem. You glance around. Your siblings are also getting dressed, or at least adding more layers of the same outfit they've worn all week. Your sister's sleeves have been patched with scraps from an old blanket. Your brother's cloak is mostly holes connected by frayed edges. Everyone smells faintly of mildew, animal hair, and hope. The baby is chewing on someone's sock. No one tries to stop her. You search for your second layer, an outer tunic, thicker and more faded, likely brown or gray, or once green, but now the color of defeat. You find it near the wall, half covered in straw. It's stiff as a board. You bend it back into shape and pull it on. There, dressed for the day. At least 3 layers, none of which are dry, and each with its own unique texture of discomfort. You flex your arms. The seams resist. Your elbows already itch. Outside, the wind howls, daring you to open the door again. Inside, the fire wheezes, the goat sneezes, and the smell of smoke clings to every thread of wool like a needy ex. Still, you're dressed. That's a start. Your shoes, such as they are, wait by the door. You made them yourself from scraps of leather and hope stitched with a bone needle and twine. They've got holes in the toes, the backs sag, and the soles are so thin you could feel a sneeze through them. But they're yours, and they're better than nothing. Barefoot in summer is fine, even freeing, but barefoot in winter? That's madness. You once tried it just for a minute. Your feet ached for 3 days. Never again. You wriggle your feet in. The right one fits well. The left one bites a little. You make a mental note to ask your uncle if he has any spare hide left from the last rabbit. Maybe you can patch them. Maybe you can trade something for a new pair. Maybe you'll just dream about socks again. You pull your hood over your head, really just a flap of cloth that used to be part of a sack, and tighten the rope belt around your tunic. There, properly peasant chic. Mud-colored, slightly soggy, and smelling of hearth smoke and goat spit. But you're warmish, and you're layered, and you're ready. You step toward the door and brace yourself for the brutal cold outside. Again, the wind is sharper today, not just cold, cruel. The kind of wind that doesn't just whistle past you, but stops to slap you on the way through. You tug your hood tighter, squint against the dull gray sky, and head for the well, or rather, where the well should be. It's a few hundred steps past the fields near the tree line and barely visible from the hut, thanks to the rising steam of your breath fogging up everything in sight. Carrying water in winter is the medieval version of an extreme sport. First, there's the walk, slippery, uneven ground, half-frozen ruts, surprise patches of mud disguised as solid dirt, and the occasional chicken trying to peck your bootlaces as if your shoes personally offended her. Then there's the actual fetching, which is an event unto itself. You pass the fence. It leans a little more every day. One of the pigs got out last week and had to be bribed back with a turnip that had been earmarked for stew. You still haven't forgiven her. The path to the well is lined with patches of icy straw probably dropped by other villagers making the same trip. It crunches underfoot like stale bread. You clutch the empty bucket in your mittenless hands, fingers already stiff. You should have brought gloves. You don't own gloves. You should have brought better wishes. When you reach the well, it greets you with a frozen rope, a frost-bitten crank, and a soft mocking groan as the wood shifts beneath your grip. You know better than to touch the metal handle with bare skin. You did that once. You remember. Your palm still holds the memory. You tug at the rope. It creaks. The bucket comes up slow, heavy, and sloshing with water so cold it might already be halfway to becoming ice again. You brace your knees, hoist it out, and immediately regret not asking someone to come help. Historians still argue whether peasant wells were communal or family-owned in these rural villages. Either way, this well is everybody's business, and if you don't get back soon, the water might just freeze solid in the bucket before you even reach the hut. You wrap the rope around your wrist for balance and start the trudge home one splashy step at a time. The wind kicks up. It smells like pine and manure and snow. You mutter a prayer under your breath, mostly to keep your jaw moving and your face from freezing stiff. About halfway back, your foot finds a rut, a deep one. You wobble, arms flail, and the bucket sloshes. Cold water leaps over the rim and lands squarely on your shin, soaking into your trousers like a wet slap from Mother Nature herself. You curse under your breath, nothing too severe, just enough to steam the air. By the time you reach the door, your arms are jelly, your thighs are burning, and your socks are now officially ice packs. You stomp your feet before entering, but the mud still comes in with you like a clingy ghost. Inside the hut, the fire is somehow still going. The goat greets you with a haughty bleat, then resumes chewing on a broom handle. Your sister takes the bucket, pours half of it into the cooking pot, and tucks the rest under the bench where it might stay liquid for another few hours. You sit down heavily on a stool that wobbles like it's considering giving up on being a stool. You flex your fingers. They protest. Water. It's so basic, so assumed, but in winter in medieval peasant life, it's a daily battle. It freezes, it spills, it soaks you. It breeds bugs if stored wrong. You can't cook without it. You can't clean. You certainly can't bathe. Not that anyone's lining up for that icy death plunge anyway. You once heard a traveling friar say that water was sacred, a gift from heaven. You agree. A very difficult gift wrapped in cold misery and tied with a frozen rope. Still mission accomplished. The hut has water, enough for a stew if someone finds the energy to cut turnips, enough to wash a few rags or wet a cloth for the baby's face. Maybe even enough to soak your feet later, though that's pushing it. For now, you huddle back near the fire, curling your toes to chase away the sting. The door creaks, the wind moans, and tomorrow you'll walk to the well again, because someone always has to. It's hard to imagine a task more miserable than fetching water in winter, until you're told it's your turn to go dig up the last of the turnips from under the frozen garden bed. You stare at your mother, hopeful she's joking. She's not. You wrap another layer around your shoulders, an old wool shawl stiff from last week's soup spill, and trudge out the door again. The pig grunts like she knows where you're going and thinks it's hilarious. The garden isn't far, just a small patch behind the hut, fenced with brittle twigs and scraps of rope to keep the goats from turning it into a buffet. You push open the gate and step into a world that feels more like a battlefield than a vegetable patch. The ground crunches beneath your feet, not soft earth, but hard-packed soil frozen into stubborn ridges. You kneel, brush aside the top layer of snow, and begin the delicate process of trying to unearth a vegetable with your bare hands. It's brutal, not dramatic, not bloody. Just cold, slow, and numb-fingered, like trying to dig through cement with a spoon made of sadness. You jab at the ground with a stick which snaps. You curse again gently. Then use your fingernails until they feel like they're going to crack. Eventually, you hit something. Lumpy, knobby, your frozen prize. You yank it free and hold it up like it's Excalibur. A turnip pale and sad, coated in frost and clinging dirt. You'll be eating it later. All of it. Leave skin and whatever flavor might still be hiding in its chilly little heart. You dig out 3 more, your hands turning red and raw. By the time you finish, your knuckles feel like they've been through a windmill. You blow into them and stuff the turnips into a cloth sack. The sack, too, is damp. Of course it is. Back inside, you dump your haul beside the hearth like a weary knight returning from battle. Your sister's trying to light the lamp. It's a shallow bowl of fat with a bit of rag shoved in. The flame sputters, catching after a few failed attempts, and throws long shadows across the walls. They dance over the wooden beams, the rough walls, and the goat who's licking one of the turnips with casual interest. Someone swats her away with a broom. The turnips are a big deal. They're not exciting, but they're reliable. The dependable grunt worker of the medieval vegetable world. They survive where other crops give up. They taste earthy, bitter, occasionally peppery if you're lucky, or like sadness if you're not. Historians still debate whether peasants genuinely liked turnips or just tolerated them. Based on your current relationship with them, it's definitely the latter. Your mother gets to work. She peels one with the edge of a spoon and slices it thin. Some of it goes in a pot with the last of the oats. The rest she saves for later, likely to mash into something with salt, or to stretch a soup that doesn't want to be stretched. The stew simmers, releasing a smell you recognize all too well. Boiled root. It's humble, honest, and exactly what you'll be tasting in your dreams tonight. You take a seat and flex your fingers again, watching the steam rise. You know this dinner won't be filling, it won't be delicious, but it will be hot, and that's something. Sometimes you think about the rich folk in town. You imagine them eating pies, meat, buttered bread, apples preserved in honey. You once saw a roast goose at a noble's table, golden, shiny, perfect. You remember the smell. It haunts you in winter. But today, it's turnips. Boiled, salted, probably overcooked, probably underseasoned. They'll fill the air with their pungent comfort. They'll fill your belly with their fibrous truth. You reach into your pocket and pull out a crust of bread saved from last week. It's hard enough to chip a tooth, but you dip it into the broth. It softens just enough to bite. You chew slowly, eyes closed, letting the warmth rise back into your bones. Not bad. Not great. But not bad. The wind howls again. The door rattles. And the turnips bubble softly in the pot like a lullaby for the poor. The baby's crying again, a low rasping wail that comes from somewhere in the bed pile. It's hard to tell which lump is making the noise. Everyone's bundled under the same blanket, half buried in straw arms and legs, tangled like a basket of firewood. Someone shifts, someone groans, and eventually your sister pops her head out, wild-haired and bleary-eyed. It's your turn, she mumbles, before promptly retreating under the covers like a hibernating hedgehog. So it's you, again. You shuffle over, find the baby, feel small, damp, angry, and lift her gently. She's soaked through her linen smock, which isn't surprising since it's the only one she owns and hasn't been dry in weeks. You wrap her in a warm-ish cloth and start to hum one of the songs passed down for generations. Slow, repetitive, with more rhythm than melody. The kind of tune that's less about music and more about survival. Keeping children alive in the winter is its own kind of heroism. There's no medicine, no proper diapers, no milk unless the goat cooperates. No guarantee that even the smallest cough won't turn into something worse. Your mother once said that babies in the village have two states in winter: swaddled or sick. You look down at the baby's flushed cheeks, run a hand across her forehead, and whisper a little prayer you barely remember the words to. Something about warmth. Something about angels. You shift closer to the hearth. The fire has dwindled to embers, but it's still warm enough. You tuck the baby inside your shawl, and she quiets a little, blinking up at you like she's surprised you have a face. The lullabies your mother taught you are full of strange imagery. Warnings hidden in rhyme. Sleep, little mouse, or the wind will bite your nose. Close your eyes, or the frost will steal your toes. Comforting in their way. Morbid but honest. A medieval kind of tenderness. Historians still debate whether lullabies were intended purely for children or also served as catharsis for mothers, a way to whisper their fears into the straw-scented night. You think it's both. When your mother sings them, there's a tired weight in her voice, like she's trying to lull not just the baby, but the entire world to sleep. You rock slowly, listening to the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of wind sneaking through the eaves. The baby hiccups once, then sighs. You smile. Small victories. Meanwhile, your brother's chasing the chicken around the hut. She's decided the baby's corner is her new laying spot, and she's making her case in clucks and airborne feathers. He stumbles, trips over the pig, and nearly knocks over the water bucket. It's chaos, but no one's bleeding and nothing's broken, so it doesn't count as a crisis. You stand baby still in arms and carefully steer toward the corner furthest from the madness. You lay her back on the makeshift bed, some wool, some straw, some folded rags that used to be your aunt's apron, and tuck her in gently. She squirms, once sighs again, and closes her eyes. You sit beside her watching for a minute, trying not to think too hard about how easy it is to lose a child in the cold months. It's something everyone knows, but never says aloud. You've seen the little wooden crosses by the chapel where the snow drifts taller than the headstones. Instead, you count the baby's breaths one by one. Steady, soft, still here. She dreams of something, maybe. Her fingers twitch, her nose wrinkles. You hope it's a nice dream, something with sunlight or goats that don't eat the laundry. In the background, your mother starts humming again, the tune slow and a little cracked. It's the same lullaby passed from voice to voice, like a sacred thread. You join in softly, your voice blending with hers, like two warm embers in the dark. Sleep, little one. The wind won't find you here. Sleep, little one. Your breath is all we hear. You hear at first a soft scuffling in the straw, like tiny claws on parchment. Then a scritch. Then another. The kind of sound that makes your skin tingle even before your brain has caught up. You pause. Hold your breath. There it is again. Something's under the bench, or behind the firewood pile, or inside the wattle wall, or worst of all, in the straw bed. You stand slowly, gently nudging the sleeping baby's bundle closer to the fire with your foot. She doesn't stir. You wish you could say the same. There's a flash of movement, quick brown, and just barely big enough to be definitely not a mouse. You reach for the broom. Not because you're going to kill anything, let's not get dramatic, but because whacking the straw a few times makes you feel like you're doing something about it. Whap. Silence. Then a faint scritch, scritch, scritch from the opposite corner, as if the rat just moved seats and brought popcorn. Rats are a fact of life in your hut. Always have been. They love the warmth, the crumbs, the buckets of oats, and the opportunity to nibble on your fingernails while you sleep. Once your cousin swore she woke up with one sitting on her chest, staring at her like it was considering tenancy. She moved out for a week, then moved back in, because where else was she going to go? You shift some straw with the broom handle. Another flash of movement. Something squeaks in protest. You try not to think about how many of them might be living just under the surface, like squatter villages with fur and beady eyes. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants saw rats as a serious threat or just another nuisance like mud or bad weather. You suppose it depends on the day. Some blamed rats for sickness. Others simply cursed them when they ate half the winter grain. But no one ever managed to get rid of them. Not really. You sit back down, eyes scanning the floor like a sentry. The fire pops suddenly and you jump. Embers flicker toward the rafters, illuminating a second far less charming problem bugs. Little ones, crawling along the ceiling beams. Probably fleas, possibly lice. Maybe the kind of thing that doesn't even have a name, but still manages to bite you behind the knee at 3 a.m. You scratch reflexively. That spot. Then another. And another. There's an entire invisible kingdom living inside your clothes. You know this. You've made peace with it. Sort of. Your mother makes a lye soap from ash and pig fat that's meant to help. But the only thing it kills is your will to live. Your uncle swears by vinegar. Your grandmother says to sleep with garlic under your shirt. Your cousin once rubbed onion all over her arms for a week and claimed the bugs left her alone out of respect. You try not to judge. Still you dream of cleanliness, of fresh linen, of one night without something small and itchy scuttling across your shoulder. You've heard of noble women with combs made from ivory who sit by the window brushing their hair in the sun. You've heard of servants who change the bedding weekly. You don't believe it. You pick a flea off your sleeve, flick it into the fire, and watch it sizzle. In the corner, the pig groans and shifts tail thumping against the wall. You think she might have crushed a mouse or become friends with one. Honestly, the relationship seems complicated. The goat's ears flick. Her eyes are open, and she's watching the corner like she's got her own rodent vendetta. You hope she acts on it. She has better aim with her horns than you do with the broom. Then a loud crash from the rafters, something falling. A small puff of straw rains down, and everyone in the hut flinches. Your brother sits bolt upright from the bed pile, hair sticking out in all directions, face full of panic. "What was that?" he whispers. "A rat," you say too casually. He groans and flops back down, muttering something about moving into the woods where it's cleaner. You chuckle, just a little, then settle back against the wall eyes, heavy fingers still twitching from broom-swinging adrenaline. The fire crackles. The baby sighs. The wind outside whines through the cracks in the walls. And somewhere under the straw, Bernard the rat is probably planning his next recon mission. It's late now, though. Late in winter is hard to define. The sky went dark hours ago. The fire has burned low, and time has taken on that peculiar stretchy quality it gets in the middle of cold, sleepless nights. You're lying down, sort of, propped against a lumpy sack that smells faintly of leeks and strongly of feet. Your tunic sticks to your skin in some places and gapes open in others. One foot is cold. The other is somehow colder. Across the hut, someone's muttering in their sleep. The baby has settled. The pig is definitely snoring again. The goat is chewing something she found in the corner. You hope it isn't your glove. The straw rustles softly. Not from rats this time, just shifting limbs, bodies turning in semi-conscious misery, each of you seeking that one magical position where the ground doesn't dig into your hip and the air doesn't whistle down your neck. You're tired, exhausted even, but your brain refuses to sleep. You watch the last bit of fire flicker inside the hearth. The embers are pulsing, barely glowing now, and casting long, low shadows that jitter across the walls like specters from old stories. It's kind of beautiful in a bleak way. Then you hear it, a distant howl, long, low, mournful, a wolf maybe, or a dog gone feral. Either way, it's far enough away that you don't bolt upright, but close enough to press a cold little finger of unease along your spine. Another howl follows, this one higher layered with a strange echo, like two voices at once. You hold your breath. No one else stirs. Maybe they're used to it. Maybe they're asleep. Maybe they're just pretending they didn't hear it in case the next sound is closer. The wolf cries drift on, swallowed by the wind and distance. The silence afterward feels louder. You've heard the tales. Wolves stealing into villages, snatching livestock, sometimes worse. One old woman used to say if you heard 3 howls, it meant they were hunting. If you heard 4, it meant they were close. You've never heard more than 2. Tonight, you don't want to test the theory. You pull the blanket higher, what's left of it, and tuck your chin against your knees. You try to think of something peaceful, something nice. But medieval dreams don't come on command. Instead, your mind plays tricks. You pictured the snow drifting against the door, slowly piling up, the roof groaning again, a creak in the night, a cold nose against your foot, eyes in the dark that aren't rat eyes. You shake your head, blink fast, and breathe in the smoke-soaked air. This is why sleep comes hard in winter. Not just because of the cold, but because of everything that lives in the cold and everything that doesn't. Sometimes when you're half asleep like this, you get dreams that don't quite feel like dreams. You see the same hut but warm. You see your mother laughing, your sister brushing her hair, bread rising in the hearth, a cat curled up on your chest instead of a pig on your foot. You like those dreams. They're rare, but they don't last. Tonight, what comes instead is half sleep, the kind where you drift in and out, never quite tipping over the edge. You hear every sound, every breath, every twitch of someone's straw mattress. You even hear your own thoughts clattering around like loose beans in a jar. You imagine what morning will bring. Another fire to light. More turnips to peel. Maybe a visit from the neighbors, maybe not. Maybe a leak in the roof will finally turn into a stream. Maybe the goat will break the fence again and you'll spend 2 hours chasing her in the snow barefoot and yelling words you technically learned in church. You sigh, deeply, and let your body sag just a little more. Outside the wind moans again, but softer this time, like it's tired too. You close your eyes, and this time you don't open them right away. You wake before the sun again. Not that you meant to. It's just that your shoulder hurts, your foot's numb, and someone, possibly the pig, has drooled on your sleeve. You peel open one eye. The world is murky gray and slightly smoky. The embers in the hearth are no longer glowing. The room feels like the inside of a snowdrift. You groan quietly. Stretching doesn't help. Every joint creaks. Your neck clicks like someone's turning a rusty key. You sit up anyway. It's time. It's always time. No rooster crows. He's probably frozen halfway through his morning declaration. Outside, the sky is a dull smear. Not quite black, not quite blue. The light is cold, diffused. You can't see the sun, but you feel the ache of it trying. Your feet hit the ground with a squish. The floor is wetter today. You don't ask why. You don't want to know why. You step carefully, navigate the piles of limbs and straw, and head toward the hearth. You kneel beside it and prod the ashes with the stick you keep just for this purpose. Nothing. Not even a spark. So you begin again, kindling straw breath. It takes time. Your fingers are clumsy. You're too tired to curse. Eventually, it catches. The tiniest flame, a pale blue whisper. You feed it gently. It flares, coughs, grows into something modestly respectable. You cup your hands around it like it's a newborn bird. The goat stirs. The pig snorts. Someone in the bed pile mutters something that sounds like bread and then rolls over. You stand and stretch again. Your breath curls in front of you like smoke. You pull on your tunic, still damp, and your cloak still frayed, and make your way to the door. You unlatch the wood bar and push it open. Outside, it's exactly what you expected. Gray, brutal. Icy wind slides down the back of your neck like a thief. Snow crusts the fence posts. The ground is a mixture of slush, manure, and defeat. You take one deep breath and let it out slowly. The morning smells like mud and fire and survival. Another day begins, and now as the cold gray light filters through the cracks in your tiny world, you settle again near the hearth. The fire whispers soft now, flickering gently, like it's finally learned to behave. The others are still asleep, bundled together like roots beneath the earth, quiet, unmoving breathing, slowly beneath worn wool and straw. You lean against the wall, shoulders, tired eyes half closed. The smoke no longer stings, the chill no longer bites. Everything somehow has softened. The wind outside no longer howls, it hums. A soft, steady hum that wraps around your hut like a lullaby, too old to remember, too deep to forget. You listen to the small sounds, the fire crackling low, the rhythmic breath of sleeping children, the creak of the rafters as they settle into morning. The hut feels quieter now, more peaceful. Not because it's changed, but because you have. You've made it through another night. Tomorrow will come with its usual demands. Mud, chores, smoked turnips. And yes, the chamber pot will need emptying again. But for now, you're still. You're safe. And for this small moment, wrapped in layers of wool and winter air, you feel something almost like warmth. You close your eyes just for a little while longer. The wind carries a promise spring will come. Eventually, the mud will dry, the roof will hold, the goat will behave. Maybe, but not yet. Not now. For now, just sleep. Just sleep.